Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into October and into our new thing around here. We hope you're checking out our website and all the things that go around Baltimore versus Washington. And we talked with John Feinstein and Dick Cass, and Dave Preston and I did a little homage to Mac Davis and Nick Nolte in North Dallas 40. And, anything I could do after, they say 24-hour rule. Hell, by 1 o'clock on Tuesday, I didn't want to talk about Monday night anymore. I made Luke Jones go away for a couple of days, and Harbaugh had his press conferences, and it's a short week. And I'm headed down to D.C. to sit in the lousy seat. You're staying home in Pennsylvania to watch the game and pray for the best during the election. And, I guess more than anything, this week used to really anger up my blood. And on behalf of your father, it would piss him off, and my father too, about Baltimore and Washington. But it's not that anymore, right? Especially not this week where it's more like COVID and the Titans, and let's just get through this, and let's make sure we don't stub our toe, and let's make sure we don't look like we did on Monday night. And then in the middle of the day on Thursday, they go giving a whopping contract 3 weeks into a pandemic. And I guess I'm shocked just by the timing of it ever this time of the year. But Marlon Humphrey got rich. So in addition to just previewing the game, it's turned out to be a pretty monumental week, a major decision by the organization, right?
Yeah, it really was. I can't say I was surprised by it as much as maybe the timing a little bit, to your point. But I think Marlon Humphrey, from day one, when you think back to when he was drafted in 2017, was kind of a surprising pick, right? I mean, people had talked about O.J. Howard, Reuben Foster. The Ravens had already signed Brandon Carr that offseason. They had Jimmy Smith. So there was a thought that, corner wasn't, corner's always a need to some extent, going back to our many conversations about wanting depth, but wasn't necessarily 1A at the top of their list or anything like that. So there had been some questions about him as far as his deep coverage. Some draft pundits had actually projected Marlon Humphrey to perhaps be a safety sooner rather than later in his NFL career because of some questions about his ball skills, things of that nature. And from day one, when he stepped in, and he wasn't a day one starter, not because of ability, but because of the fact that the Ravens had Jimmy Smith and they had Brandon Carr, who had come in to be a starter. But he played like a starter from day one. He was an above average talent from the moment he stepped on the field in Owings Mills, and he just kept getting better. And we saw this 2 years ago. He was voted team MVP the year where Lamar Jackson takes over after the bye week, and the Ravens go through this complete on-the-fly facelift offensively. Their defense, if you remember how well they played in the second half of the season especially, there wasn't that alpha dog like Ray Lewis or Ed Reed in their prime, or even Terrell Suggs, who was in the midst of his last year with the team. But the consensus choice for the top player on that defense at that point really became Marlon Humphrey. And I think for me, when I look at what he did last year, when you consider they lost Tavon Young in the preseason with a neck injury, they tried Brandon Carr, they tried Anthony Averett, they tried Maurice Kennedy, and they just didn't have that answer at that slot position, that nickel spot, which has become so important. We still refer to the nickel as a sub package, but it's not. It's the base. It's the base for virtually every team in the NFL, with it being such a pass-happy league. So you need that third corner. So Marlon Humphrey, despite the fact that he's 6 foot and very much profiles as your traditional outside corner, the Ravens and Chris Hewitt asked him to move inside, and we saw that starting in week 4, the week after the Kansas City game last year, and he played there exceptionally well. And you see how he covers. He tackles like a linebacker. He's really developed a knack for taking the ball away, whether it's an interception, whether it's a forced fumble. This is a guy that teammates and coaches say, yeah, he's a corner, but he plays like a linebacker. And I think when you really look at this defense and seeing how defense has evolved over the years in general, he really is that guy that you're kind of building around. You used to think about building around your inside linebacker, right? Ray Lewis, or you think about
you go back to Jack Lambert, Mike Singletary, and
cool.
how the game evolved in the 70s and what they needed to stop at that period of time. Where the best athlete on the field was always the running back.
Yeah, I mean, the game's changed a lot in that way, and with the rules constantly being catered toward more and more offense, more and more passing, those shutdown corners, and that's not a new term. We talked about that with Deion Sanders in the 90s. We talked about that with Chris McAllister in the early 2000s for the Ravens, but those guys are at an even greater premium than they've ever been because of how difficult it is to really cover in this league consistently. So when you have one, and when you have one who feels like he's been a Raven for quite some time, but he just turned 24 years old over the summer, if you're going to invest a near $100 million contract in a corner, he certainly fits the profile and is far more preferable than looking at some of the other top corners in the league who are in their late 20s or approaching 30 years old. I
Or
mean,
go back to the draft and try to get another one, which
well,
they're
and that's
still looking
right.
for another Ray Lewis, and exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to replace. I mean, you never replace those elite Hall of Fame type guys. I mean, the Ravens, look how many times they've gone to the well through free agency or the draft to try to replace Ed Reed. They've actually done a nice job with Ray Lewis when you draft C.J. Mosley with a 1-year window in there that Arthur Brown didn't work out. But that shutdown corner, that guy that you can really anchor your secondary around, knowing how important secondary play is in today's game. I was not at all surprised to see the Ravens make this kind of investment. And it comes down to this. They have him under contract this year, of course. They had already exercised their 5th-year option, which was going to pay him around $10 million next year, 10.244. That is still in play. This extension, 5 years, $98.75 million, begins after next year's 5th-year option. So that means they have Marlon Humphrey under contract until 2026. And normally when you say that about a guy's second contract, you're thinking, okay, I don't know if I want to have another year, but when you think about this contract, and look, time will tell whether he finishes out this deal. I mean, we never quite know for sure when you're talking about 5 or 6 years for a football player. I mean, just the nature of the game, even at the cornerback position. Ladarius Webb at one point in time signed a long-term deal, and we saw how that turned out because of injuries. But it's crazy to think that at the end of that deal, if this deal plays out, Marlon Humphrey will just be finishing his age 30 season. He'll be 30 years old.
Jimmy
And at
Smith
that
is what, 32 now?
32 at
33?
this point,
Yeah,
right?
32.
So it just speaks to, one, how young he was coming into the league and how much success he has already piled up at just such a young age. And
that the Ravens say, we want to marry you, right? And
right.
that isn't shocking. It's shocking that the timing of it, and also for me, just that they have other people in line. I mean, I'm not shocked they're in love with Marlon Humphrey, but my assumption is, and this isn't in the last couple of weeks, that they're in love with Mark Andrews too, and that they're going to be in love with Orlando Brown and Ronnie Stanley and all of the, and Lamar, right? Like, so down the line, who do they want to give money to and who do they not? And you've talked about Brandon Williams, and we've talked about Earl Thomas, and we've talked about guys they've given some money to, and other guys that they've just let walk. Whether pick any of the offensive linemen, right? I mean, they let the entire offensive line walk, whether it was Wagner, Jensen, Assembly. We just go down the line, right? They just let those guys leave, as well as a bunch of linebackers from Ellerbe and Art Jones all the way through, that they've always been willing to let certain people leave and sign other people. And they've always been very deft at going into the market and grabbing that 30-plus something special free agent. Steve Smith, Derek Mason, Trevor Price, Anquan Bolden wasn't a free agent, but you get where I'm going with that. This, though, is what – and they signed McAllister. I'll never forget. When they gave McAllister all that money, it was right before the Redskins game, and Ozzie literally was in the back of the Redskins press box where I'm going to be on Sunday doing a press conference with the media.
You're using
about
the R word, by the way.
John Feinstein stopped me 6 times.
You said it like 3 times, so I had to say something.
I'm really not doing it on purpose.
I'm not judging you, but.
No, but I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just what I mean, when I think of them and it, I'm 52 in 2 weeks, okay? So it's
I understand.
It's not.
I'm giving you a hard time. I totally understand.
Is this where I mentioned the San Diego Chargers, or do I not?
Exactly. But no, you just made the point. If there was something that was a little more surprising, beyond just the general in-season timing of this, it's Ronnie Stanley. think about it. I mean, if you're Ronnie Stanley's representation, you're seeing the first round pick taken the year after your
Or Matt
client.
Judon, right, to some
Well,
degree, too.
and I think, I mean, with Matthew Judon, I think, I mean, the Ravens clearly had the financial wherewithal to tag him. And I've never been strongly convinced that they're going to give him a blank check, so to speak. I think it's very much a case with him that they didn't have anyone else. They didn't draft an edge guy. They weren't in position to pick Chase Young, for example. So they went with Judon, and we're going to see how it plays out. And, I mean, to this point in the season, it's kind of been a slow statistical start for him. Who knows what's going to happen there? But I never viewed him in the same way that I viewed Humphrey. I mean, Lamar's the beginning here. We know Lamar is, it's not even worth putting him on the priority list. It's just the assumption. You're paying him. But when you're looking at the rest of these guys, your franchise left tackle, a shutdown number one corner, a Pro Bowl tight end down the road, potentially your Pro Bowl right tackle in Orlando Brown, Marquise Brown. We'll see how that evolves over the next couple years. But if you were looking at a logical order for these guys, not including Judon, who was franchised, and I'm sure they'll revisit it to some degree after the season, whether that's,
By the way, you know what else is crazy? Hayden Hurst is going to go down to Atlanta, become a star, right? Like he might get first round. They might have had to have paid him had he fit the system a little better, right? Like they had other players that are going to get paid a lot of money. Well, I bet over the last 15 years, their players have made more money than anybody. Just for how much they've gone out into the marketplace and made.
It's certainly they're up there. I mean, I don't know if they're number one, but they have to be up there. But to the point I was trying to make with Ronnie Stanley, I think this is probably a pretty telling sign that either they're at an impasse or they haven't gotten very far in talks. And we talked about this draft weekend. When you look at the Laramie Tunsil deal that Houston and Bill O'Brien gave Tunsil, I mean, this didn't blow up the left tackle market. It eviscerated it. I mean, it was an absolute bomb to the left tackle market. And if you're Ronnie Stanley, you look at his profile and his body of work compared to Laramie Tunsil, Stanley's the better player. And I think you could find by any measure, you could justify that. So if you're Ronnie Stanley, you're saying, look, I understand that Tunsil had leverage in Houston when you consider the assets they gave up, much in the same way that Jalen Ramsey had leverage with the Rams after the deal that they completed to acquire him from Jacksonville. But if you're Ronnie Stanley, you're still saying, I get that, but I don't know if markedly is not the right word or if that's the right word, but I'm clearly better than this guy. So why am I going to take less than him? So if you're the Ravens, you might, not that you're dragging your feet or that you don't like Ronnie Stanley as a player, you're still trying to evaluate this entire picture that we're talking about, what this salary cap is going to look like over the next few years. And you're wondering, okay, maybe before the Tunsil deal, we would have been comfortable making him the highest paid left tackle in the league. But then when that deal just turned the left tackle market on its head, it's not to say we won't pay him, but we can
get Marlon Dunn right now, right?
We can get Marlon Dunn potentially, and we'll look at this a little bit longer, and we'll see how this plays out. And if we need to tag Ronnie Stanley in 2021, maybe that's our option, and then we'll see.
Well, Marlon's been the healthier player too over the course of, and probably will be the more durable player given what he does for a living, right?
Yeah,
Leaves Frank aside with Jimmy Smith and Tavon. I mean, look, they're football players. They're not like racehorses, right?
Right. I mean,
they're like racehorses.
As I always say to you, guys are durable until they're not anymore. Joe Flacco was a great example.
By the way, you just said the two key words. My wife literally broke in on the taping to say Joe Flacco's in the game for the Jets. So, you're talking about all this money and Tunsil and Stanley, and I was going to give you the timeout and say, hold on. Joe Flacco's not only in the game, but this franchise took him to Super Bowl weekend MVP Joe Montana to get a deal done with him and I don't even remember who was in line in front of him then. Probably Suggs, and I don't even remember who the contract guys were in 11 and 12. But he was the quarterback. He was what they were building around. They were never going to let him go. And maybe they would feel that way about franchising Orlando Brown when the time came, or whatever that thing would be. Mark Andrews, whatever player, Hollywood, the guy might get away from them at that point, that they would have that. But going 14-2 creates this, though, right? It creates you and me. If they signed Stanley yesterday, we'd say, wow, what about Marlon? Right? I mean, you don't have enough money to give to everyone. And I guess that was my point to say over the last 15 years, yeah, you say, well, you don't want to lose Wagner. You don't want to lose Jensen. You don't want to lose player X. Fill in anybody you want. Zadarius Smith, right? More recently, right? Or Pernell McPhee the time before that. And somebody's out there ready to give stupid money, Laramie Tunzel money, and Ozzy, and I still think he's in the building every day because everybody tells me he is, that the organization still is going to be prudent in that way. And that's why when the deal happens on a Thursday afternoon during Washington week in week 3 in the middle of a plague, I'm like, well, it's not a shotgun wedding, right? I mean, literally, right? Like, this is the Ravens really evaluating this, and you know how they are, that there is a plan for Stanley and a plan for – and that's the plan for now. And there's clearly money put aside in 2023 and 24 for Lamar, and they think like that. And this fit their plan. So I guess for me, the scoreboard says the Ravens love Marlon Humphrey, and maybe more than I woke up Thursday morning believing they did.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, keep in mind, especially with the creativity that Eric DaCosta has shown since taking over as general manager, I think everything's on the table other than not paying your quarterback. I mean, that's the obvious one. But is the scenario with Ronnie Stanley, you tag him next year? Is there a tag and trade potential where some team is willing to blow you away with draft assets and maybe you draft a tackle in the process? I mean, you just don't know. Is the value of a franchise left tackle quite as dramatic when you run this kind of offense compared to a statuesque Joe Flacco or Dan Marino or Tom Brady standing in the pocket 50 times a game? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying they won't sign Ronnie Stanley or that they shouldn't sign Ronnie Stanley. I'm just giving you the whole picture here.
You're giving me that they didn't sign Ronnie Stanley.
They didn't sign him to this point, and I think this is probably a pretty decent sign that tells you that negotiations clearly went better with Marlon and his and Joel Siegel's representation than it was going with Ronnie Stanley. So does that mean Stanley doesn't get paid? I'm not saying that. I don't know that at this point. But to your point, you look at the numbers that we're already seeing, the numbers that you anticipate. I mean, forget about Mahomes' deal. Look what Houston gave to Deshaun Watson. We can debate Patrick Mahomes. I don't even know if it's a debate based on Monday, the freshness of what happened on Monday, but you could certainly say, all right, Patrick Mahomes is better and maybe markedly better than Lamar Jackson and every other quarterback in the league, but you certainly have to put Lamar ahead of Deshaun Watson and look at the money he got. So you have that deal. You have the Marlon Humphrey deal. You're going to have Mark Andrews. You're going to have Marquise Brown. You're going to have Orlando Brown Jr. You already are dealing with what to do with Matthew Judon. You have Stanley. Of those players I just mentioned, Nestor, I can tell you right now, I'll bet you 2 pies at Pizza John's that they're not going to be able to keep all those guys. That's just not going to be on the table. So how do you navigate? How do you maximize your assets? Anyone that you're going to lose, how can you do it in a way where perhaps you gain some assets in the process? That's why I throw out the possibility of a tag and trade, as we've seen that become a little more of a thing around the league over the last couple years. So the options, I've talked about this a lot over the years, and this isn't an idea unique to anything in my head. There are many different ways to go about building a roster. We talk about this in baseball all the time in terms of, do you spend the money for a Mike Trout when you have so many other needs on your roster, or you might not be one player away? But
like, did the Orioles really need Manny Machado right now?
I mean, you kind of think
Chris
about
Davis in this case, but yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a different discussion for another time. But
well, to your point, I mean, how many players? Who do you want on a bad team, and who do you need on a good team? And every year, if you're a genius, you take the 32nd pick and you figure it out. Belichick's been doing that for 20 years, right?
Yeah, and you just mentioned Belichick. I mean, look how many great players New England let go over the years, and guys where they would leave, and what would everyone say? Oh, is this going to be the end of the Patriot dynasty? Well, it wasn't, because they still had Brady and Belichick. And I think when you're the Ravens, continuing the career trajectory that he's been on to this point, I think you're going to feel very confident and say, no, this won't be the end of the Ravens if they have to let Ronnie Stanley go, or if they have to let Mark Andrews go. Why? Because they have Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh. So, I mean, that's why you have to go through all the different scenarios. This is where analytics come into play. This is where your cap management comes into play. This is when we're talking about every year the compensatory picks and what those mean to their draft capital and their ability to maneuver on draft day or trade those picks for other positions of need, with a veteran player like they did with Calais Campbell this offseason. So, I mean, it's always a puzzle. I mean, Ozzie always talked about that over the years. And it's very clear, though, that they felt Marlon Humphrey was a cornerstone for this roster. And might be too strong to call him the Lamar Jackson of the defense because no one is as valuable as a franchise MVP caliber quarterback on your entire roster. But if you want to make that very simplistic comparison, it's very clear that they thought Marlon Humphrey was someone that was indispensable, someone that they needed to have. And then when you couple that with the fact that you did give Marcus Peters an extension, not as lucrative as Humphreys, but you're going to have that tandem together for the next couple of years at a minimum. It puts you in really good position to continue to have a great defense. But as time goes on, there'll be, I don't know if attrition's the right word, but very clearly there are going to be some guys that they're going to have to let go because you're not going to have an MVP quarterback on a rookie contract much longer. So, in the case of Humphrey, again, the body of work was there. And unlike the Tavon Young extension, which, putting aside the unfortunate development of the fact that the guy has played one whole game since he signed that extension last February, that was still an extension based much more on projection and anticipating what he was going to do. Because remember, he had already missed a full season with a torn ACL the first time around, but they were still projecting him to become one of the best, if not the best, slot corner in the league. In the case of Humphrey, he's already made a Pro Bowl. He was named first team All-Pro last year. And guess what? Could you have waited until next year at this time? Sure. But all that was going to happen potentially, barring an injury, and that's the risk you take with any player, he has another Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber season. Guess what? Marlon Humphrey now is arguing with an even more convincing case that he should get even more than Jalen Ramsey just got from the Rams back in September. So really, I mean, this wasn't anything. I don't want to say it was savvy because, I mean, the Ravens made him the second highest paid corner in the NFL. They gave him market value, but the thought was he's 24 years old. He's already one of the best, for my money, 4 or 5 corners in the league at the very least. And he's already done it. And he's done it at a high level from the moment he stepped on the field. So,
and as Ozzie would say, he's already in the building. He's already in the program.
Right. So there's only one way for this to go, barring a catastrophic injury, the price tag going up. So in this case, they're still getting him on the cheap this year in terms of his salary. His 5th-year option is still in place, so that'll still give them more flexibility for next year's salary cap. And then after that, a 5-year, almost $100 million contract starts, and you're talking a couple years down the road. Guess what? The market, presumably, and it's a little more difficult to project this with COVID and the pandemic's impact from a business standpoint. What's the cap going to look like next year, and what's business going to look like for the league the next few years? But we know inevitably that salary cap's going to start going up again. So hypothetically, when Marlon Humphrey's hitting his age 27, age 28 season, should theoretically still be playing at a very high level, and that deal will look more affordable than it even does now, which isn't cheap. I mean, this is a lucrative deal, and there's risk involved with every crazy contract that you give out like this. But when you look at all the variables involved, and keep coming back to the fact that it feels like he's been a Raven for quite some time, and yet he just turned 24 years old. If you're going to make that kind of investment in a corner, that's the guy to do it with, not that corner who's been in the league 7 or 8 years, coming from somewhere else. And guess what? In that scenario, you're paying that guy much more for what he has already been in his career rather than what you're expecting him to be over the course of the next 4 or 5 years.
He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We will be talking about Marlon Humphrey and the next batch of money for Ronnie Stanley and Lamar Jackson and others after we discuss the Baltimore Washington football team matchup on Sunday. Luke, I'm going to give you 60 seconds or less to break this one down. What do you got on this one that I haven't been getting from these Redskins people this week, which is we're really good and angry on short rest. They suck. I hope my parking's good. It sounds like a nice fall day for no one down there. And I'll pretend I'm going down to watch Mick shake his ass.
I mean, I'd love to be able to provide a compelling argument for why the Ravens really need to be careful. I will say this, even with Chase Young not expected to play, that is a pretty good front. And we have seen the Ravens have some pass protection issues at times. Tyree Phillips, the rookie, we know he's a rookie. He's had some growing pains. And we've talked about Skura, although I think his play has improved since week one. Ronnie Stanley's a little bit banged up right now, dealing with a shoulder issue that forced him out of practice on Thursday. So we'll monitor that. But beyond just being aware that they do have a pretty good front, I mean, this is a bad football team they're playing on Sunday. If the Ravens have issues on Sunday, or heaven forbid, just the unfathomable, yeah, I can't say that, scenario where they would lose or something crazy like that, then everything we were talking about from the Kansas City game will pale in comparison all of a sudden. And then we're saying, what's wrong with this football team? I expect the Ravens to go out and beat them handily. I think this team is absolutely going to overwhelm Dwayne Haskins, who I think flashes from time to time, but is still, the jury is still very much out on whether this guy's a legitimate franchise quarterback. I think the Ravens are going to move the ball at will. Even with the acknowledgement of needing to protect Lamar Jackson when he drops back. I mean,
what song do they play if they actually score now? Do they?
I would think it's still probably an instrumental version, right? Well, it's no different than when the Ravens adopted the Colts fight song. You just have
they
to
better
adapt
come
the
up
words a little bit.
They better become the blank blanks.
I would say this. I don't
blank blanks.
I don't think they're going to have to worry about that too much, because I don't think that song's going to be played very often. I'm sounding flippant, but this is still a team that went 14-2 last year, and this is a team that blew out Cleveland week 1 and handled Houston on the road in week 2. I see no reason why they're not going to handle this team. And I think the more compelling question than does the Washington football team have a chance to beat the Ravens is, do we see Robert Griffin III go up against his former team in the fourth quarter? That's my lingering question I'll leave you with.
So you're saying RG3 will be doing post game with us on the Zoom?
I don't know if I go that far, because I don't know if he'll play that much, but I think that is a more compelling question for me than do the Washington, whatever you want to call them.
Have you slipped this week?
Have a chance? I'm sure I have at some point. I think a couple times I've referred to them as the team formerly known as the Skins. I mean, it's just so weird. Like, when I've written my blogs at WNST.net, referring to them as the Washington football team, it's very strange. I've referred to them as Washington plenty, but Washington football team's just
this
weird.
Would be easier if they had a name, right? If they were the Red Dogs or the Sea Dogs or the Liberty Mules or the.
It sounds like the Red Wolves is the most popular name among the fan base. I have a couple friends who are Washington football team fans.
Sorry.
They're bad choice. I'm
Most
sorry.
Of my friends have given it up. I mean, they just stopped.
But it seems like Red Wolves, Red Tails. I think that's been talked about a little bit. So, I mean, again, they're a team that's in transition. I like the Ron Rivera hire. I think some of the not using his timeouts at end of games and rationale for trying to keep guys away from injuries, and that sounds weird. It almost borders on tanking type talk, if we're going to be a little more cynical, even though I have all the respect in the world for Rivera. But I mean, this is a team that is at least a couple years away, and the Ravens are a team that, Monday notwithstanding, a championship caliber football team that I expect to go out there and far more expecting a blowout than a kind of game where Ravens are very nervous in the fourth quarter. But you never know. Any given Sunday, I suppose, the Ravens go out and play their game. I don't think they're going to have any problem.
That bobblehead looks like Evel Knievel behind you. I know it's not, but it looks a little bit like Evel Knievel. I have an Evel Knievel.
That is my brother's bobblehead case. So there is Star Wars. There are all kinds of stuff back there. So I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it. It's worth money. Luke Jones is here. Baltimore Luke. We're getting ready for football. I will be in Raljon on Sunday. Lucky me. And Luke is sitting this one out. Then Luke will be doing the next game. Thoughts about them moving the Steeler game around bye week and a scenario where that could happen?
Well, I think I mean, nothing's official, and I know people were even talking about this earlier in the week before the postponement became official, but if you're looking for the path of least resistance, I mean, the Ravens are scheduled to play the Steelers in, what is it, week 7? Both teams have a bye week, week 8. Tennessee's bye week was supposed to be week 7. So it kind of seems like the logical thing to do here would be to
Move the Ravens into a bye, right?
move the Ravens
25.
Steelers, move that game. Yeah, move that game back a week. The Steelers play the Titans in week 7. Ravens have their bye then. They play the Steelers coming off of the bye week, which certainly I would think is something John Harbaugh would be okay with. And you look at Pittsburgh and Tennessee. It's unfortunate. I mean, by everything we've heard to this point, it doesn't sound like any players did anything over the top irresponsible.
We had Dick Cass on. He said it could be
know.
as easy as a kid coming home from school. Like literally.
Correct. I mean, it could be a bus driver. It could be a bus driver for one of these teams on the road. Yeah. I mean, it's tough in that way. But I have seen some people speak to the fact that these teams are going to have their bye in week 4, and then they're going to play the rest of the season. Well, I think back to John Harbaugh, 2008, his first year as coach. Ravens are supposed to go to Houston week 2. Hurricane Ike, I think it was, right? Forced the cancellation, and the Ravens had a 2-day bye in week 2 and played the rest of the way without a week off, and they got to the AFC Championship. So it's unfair. I mean, I empathize with the teams involved that are going to lose.
Well, they
their
all
bye
knew
week,
this when they signed up,
and that's the thing. Well,
and there go by the grace
also,
of God could be your team next week, right?
And
literally.
That's the thing, and that's why John, even though this doesn't look bad for the Ravens as far as how it would shake out, they move up their bye week up a week, but you got to be flexible. We're all learning that, right? I mean, in our everyday lives, we've all had to be flexible. So if you want to make this work, you're going to have to be flexible.
One of us got a box lunch on Monday night,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, the Orioles played road games at Camden Yards. We're now seeing home teams be victims to hard counts by the visiting quarterback. We've seen that. So it's strange. It's not ideal, but it is what it is if you want to play. And it appears that from a scheduling standpoint, short of tacking on a week at the end of the regular season, which I know Roger Goodell and league officials have at least discussed that possibility. If you have this, hope it doesn't, but if it happens elsewhere and maybe you don't have bye weeks that align in any way. So short of doing something like that, it does seem like moving that the Ravens Steelers game back a week does seem like the path of least resistance, and the Ravens would just have their bye a week early, but they'd be facing the Steelers coming off of the bye, which doesn't sound like a bad scenario for John Harbaugh and his team.
Well, they'll figure that all out. Luke will figure that out. You'll get it on the WNST text service, all brought to you by friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Sunday getting you to and from Raljon, where I'll be headed, and we'll have full coverage all day long. The Marlon Humphrey signing, Baltimore versus Washington. Did I say the R word again?
I don't think I did
that
time.
All right. Well, you're
okay.
Counting. It's costing me a quarter, and I'm up to like 375.
I do have a counter, yeah.
By the end of the week.
It's like the little steps meter. I just keep it on my phone. You're up to like 36 this week or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm up to like 15 probably on the air. I mean, like literally. I mean, so like I said, if it'd be $3.75 now, pushing $5. Pushing like would it cost to get into Skateland back in the day.
Look, if anyone's going to take offense that you're being offensive by using that, no, all of your anger needs to be directed toward Daniel Snyder, who only made this change when sponsors finally started talking. So I think you're forgiven because it was their official name until earlier this summer. So, but next year when we're talking about a lousy preseason game against the Washington, whatever they are at that point, then at that point, you get a 1-year buffer. Just like at this point, we can't call them the San Diego Chargers anymore. They've been in LA. You got to
pronounce it the way my mom did. Washington. I'm going to Washington.
My dad pronounced it like that.
I know. That's why I like your dad. Absolutely. Luke Jones is here. He will be in Owings Mills and to all things Raljon. And, of course, next week it's the Cincinnati Bengals. That's how Earl Weaver pronounced it. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. All of our sponsors, Leonard Raskin at Raskin Global and Blondell Miller Schuler, Todd Schuler, all launching our new site. I got my Liberty Pure shirt on here. I got to call Doug today, too, because we're working on some things for some water, some fresh water. You can find them at 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. All right. We're back for more of all good things, Baltimore versus Washington, and Ravens versus the WTF or whatever they are.